I do teach business, the introduction to business class here. And we spend a lot of time on issues of social responsibility and alternate ways of organizing businesses. And I thought, well, this will be a really good match. And then I sat down and I said, okay, so what does it mean? What does peace mean? And I know that sounds like, a basic question, but I thought about it for a long time. And I came up with my own thoughts, and they weren't particularly, it wasn't an eloquent statement. So then I said, well, let me, I have never taken Abby's course. Let me look up on the internet, what's the definition of peace, right? So it was really funny because I didn't like any of the ones that I found. The first one I found was an absence of conflict. Like it was something that was absent something. And my initial reaction was no. Because I'm a business person, and what I do is intentional. It's not just a lack of something. Whether it be a marketing campaign or launching a new product or helping a business to get established, it's intentional. So I look for something intentional. The second definition I saw was that peace is the result of a balance of competing expectations and power. And I thought about that and I said, no, that's frustration. That's tension, that's frustration. I really want to go beyond this. So I fell back on some of my initial thoughts about what constitutes peace. And again, this is not a sentence, these are words, these are concepts. Was the concept of voluntarism as opposed to something being imposed. Because I've always found that when people do things voluntarily, when they have chosen to do something rather than being told, this is what you must do, there's a lot less resentment. If I tell my son, you need to wash the car this weekend, there's resentment and there's oh man, and the rolling of the eyes. Whereas, hey, if you wash the car this weekend, you can use it. It's a whole different set of incentives and disincentives. So as an economist who is raised in the notion of providing incentives and disincentives, I like the notion of voluntary choices. Commonality among disparate groups. Rather than there being a tension or a balance of power and different expectations, to me, peace is much more a commonality or a coming together. And how can we organize business so that what are normally disparate groups or groups that seem to have different purposes can actually have a commonality of purpose? And then that commonality should be towards the betterment of all stakeholders rather than the individual stakeholder. And those are the thoughts that I put together as I put together this PowerPoint. So what I'd like to do is identify where I see conflict in traditional business models, traditional business organization. And then go through 5 different businesses that have chosen to break the model by removing some of the conflict, by creating commonality of purpose between groups that are normally disparate. That was the framework I used for approaching this. So I'm looking at all of the disparate groups that management of a business organization has to deal with or answer to, and the different desires that each of these groups have. So I put poor management in the middle of the whole thing. And you've got, of course, government that is looking to have certain rules and regulations complied with and certain tax receipts received in a timely manner. We've got labor that has certain expectations which may or may not be able to be met by management. We have competitors who management is worried about because they're out there as part of the community, which also may have certain expectations or desires or hopes for a particular company within their community. And then the largest circle of all I have are shareholder owners. And without boring you to death, I need to talk a little bit about the whole shareholder-owner notion of business organization and what that does to the rest of this whole model of competing needs and wants. Once upon a time when businesses were smaller, you incorporated, and the people who you incorporate, you become a shareholder. You're now an owner of the corporation. And the entire reason we have corporate status is to protect those owners from liability in the event they're sued. So if your business gets sued, they don't take your house away from you, which in a sole proprietorship would happen. But shares of stock are no longer just owned by people who have a real interest in building our company together. They're sold on exchanges. Millions of shares of stock sold thousands or millions of times to people who don't necessarily have a real interest in that corporation. It used to be, I had a stock certificate, a piece of paper in my hand, and I decided I was not interested in being an owner of this company anymore. So I'd sell it to someone, and he'd give me some cash, and now he's an owner of it. And then if he wasn't interested later down the road, he'd sell that piece of paper to someone else, and you would give money to him, and then you would be an owner. But of course, now we trade and sell stocks on these enormous stock exchanges in New York, and most of it is not even done the way you're used to seeing it in movies or on TV with people screaming and yelling. It's all push button. So I decide I don't want to be an owner of this company anymore. I want to sell my stock and make some money. And I hit a button, and 2 seconds later, that stock was purchased by someone in Shanghai on the Shanghai Exchange, because stocks are sold around the world, 24 hours a day. So what we end up with are not owners of a company with a vested interest in the company or their employees or their product or their customers. What we end up with are owners calling the shots who live around the world, who may never have seen the product, who have never met any of the laborers, who have never stepped foot in the community where the business is taking place, and it's very, very much removed. And the interest, the prime vested interest here is, how much money am I making from the stock that I own? How much money can I take out of this corporation? It gets even more complicated when we realize that most stock is not owned individually by you or me or by that person in Shanghai who just bought it on the exchange, but are bundled in mutual funds. And the easiest way for me to explain that process is, if I'm a fund manager at Fidelity or Vanguard or any of the big financial houses, I have a shopping cart, and I go down the aisle in the supermarket, and I put in the peanut butter and the tin foil and the chicken and the hamburger helper and the cheddar cheese and all the different things that go in the shopping cart. And then, and each of those products represents a stock for a company, ownership in a company. And then, all you folk who have pensions, who have 401k plans, decide you want to purchase a part of my basket of goods. Now, it's not set up in a mutual fund or in almost any pension fund where you buy the peanut butter and you buy the milk and you buy the cheese. Right? Everyone buys a minute percent or share of the whole grocery cart. So you go to your financial planner at Fidelity in Boston and you buy X number of shares of a fund. Most people don't even realize what they own, what companies are in that. It also means you don't own any one stock, so you don't get a say in how the company is governed. Who does? The fund owner does. So ownership of companies, and you're looking for money as investors from that company, is now completely divorced from the operation of the company. And the people who have the say are these fund managers whose prime reason for existence is to return profit back to their shareholders, their owners. So what does this mean in some real world examples? And I don't use any, I'm not criticizing either of these companies. In fact, I will disclose I am a shareholder of both companies, which tells you a little bit more about me. So, Boston Beer Company. Boston Beer Company, #1 craft brewer in the United States. Started by Jim Koch, created one of those bathtub brewing operations that became a megastar. All the small craft brewers looked to him as their hero. Of 12,750,000 shares of stock outstanding, all right, that represents ownership of the company. Only 2.5% of that is owned by people who are actually inside the company, trying to make the decisions for it every day. 91% of the ownership of that company is owned by 147 mutual fund owners. So in reality, it's Vanguard and Fidelity and T. Rowe Price and BlackRock Investments that own thousands, millions of shares of Boston Beer, of Sam Adams. That's a really, really heavy, breathing down your neck if you're management in this company, because they're expecting returns. And if you're not performing returns and sending profit back to them, well, they dump 1 million shares on the market. Harley-Davidson, 219 million shares outstanding. Insiders own 0.5% of that company. 83% is owned by institutions, by mutual funds. So once again, two companies that you're familiar with, you've seen. The reality is the owners who elect the board of directors, who make the decisions on compensation, who make the decisions on what accountant to hire, who make decisions on policy, are in the hands of a very small number of institutions whose main concern is return for their shareholders. They may never have stepped foot in Milwaukee or Boston. They may not know the communities they operate in. They may not know the name of a single employee within those companies. So the major force here, the major pressure here, is coming from those unfamiliar with what's happening. So, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. What I would like to do now is look at 5 different models where the businesses themselves have proactively chosen to do something different, to collapse some of those competing interests, either make them in harmony or to get rid of some of them or to change it in a really, really important structural way. The first one is New Belgium Brewing, which is a really good comparison to Boston Beer, the one I just showed you, because this, even though many of you may not be familiar with them, they are the 3rd largest craft brewer in the United States. So they're almost as big as Boston, but they are based out west, which is why you haven't heard of it. It was founded in 1991 by Jeff Lebesh and Kim Jordan, a husband-wife team. He was a cyclist. He went to Belgium on a bicycle tour, fell in love with Belgian beer, decided, let's come back to the U.S. and let's open up a company. Let's do this. They literally did it in their house, in their basement. That's where this thing started. Now it's the 3rd largest craft brewery. It's located in Fort Collins, Colorado. They are just opening a new plant in Asheville, North Carolina. There are plans to expand into Canada at this point. They have 450 employees. They started this with a socially responsible conscience. And that's really important because these are the two founders. And they decided that one way they could compensate employees in the beginning, because they didn't have a lot of income coming in, like most businesses in the very beginning, was to give them shares of stock in the company. So the first thing you notice right there, this is an employee stock ownership plan, an ESOP. The first thing you notice is that the owners and labor, rather than being disparate groups that don't know each other, are now becoming the same group with the same interests. They decided this was going so well, employees liked this idea, that from 2012, when it was 43% employee-owned, the company bought back stock they had sold to other people and gave it back as compensation to the employees, so that by January of 2013, 1 year ago, they became 100% employee-owned. This model completely collapses labor and shareholders. The owners now know the community. They know labor because they are labor. They know management and the difficulties management may have with competition or labor or a government or a community because they live there. So you have a 100% employee-owned company. What does that mean? Is that can that possibly, I don't know, it sounds communist to me. Can that possibly work? Can you make a profit doing that? All employees, as part of this new ownership model, have access to company financial books. That's not usually the case in most companies. In addition, a lot of them said, well, I don't understand all these numbers. So the company instituted free financial literacy training throughout the year so that its owner labor members could understand what the books meant and have a better sense of how to participate in management. All labor participate in governance decisions and decide what to do with the company's profit. Once again, you're not saying this pot goes to the shareholders and this pot goes to the labor because it's the same group of people. Results. All employees have company-paid health insurance, including medical, prescription drugs, vision, wellness, chiropractic, acupuncture, 100% company-paid, no copay. It's one of the best health plans you can find anywhere in the United States because they decided that some of the profits that this company makes should be plowed into providing a group plan for them that's this good. If that's not enough, all employees have flex hours, which makes it a lot easier for people who are caretaking for an elderly relative or who have children in school to be able to come before or after school. On-site childcare. You get 1 paid hour off for every 2 hours you volunteer in the community. And this is a way to knit together labor, who are shareholders, who live in the community, with the rest of the community. So you put in 2 hours doing a river cleanup. You put in 2 hours working for Trap Rock Peace and Justice Center. You put in 2 hours working with a literacy project. You get 1 hour off of work paid because your contribution to the community is seen as something important to this business in Fort Collins. After 1 year, you technically have ownership after you've worked there for 1 year and you get your first set of stock. You also get a free bicycle because we want to promote bicycling as a mode of transportation. If you need to do company errands during work and you can't use a bicycle because you need a vehicle, you have to use the company's electric vehicles. After year 5, you get an all-expense-paid week trip to Belgium. After year 10, you get a 4-week paid sabbatical to kind of recharge your batteries. The employees this year voted by a margin, because they all get to vote, by a 100% margin to become the first 100% wind-powered brewery in the United States. They are completely wind-powered. And a brewery uses a lot of energy because you're cooking, hops and you're roasting barley. It's more expensive to them than using the regular sources of electricity. They decided to cut their own compensation, to reduce the profit sharing they received in order to make up that difference. That is a model, and it's probably of all of the ones I'm going to show you, this is probably my favorite one. This is a model that has found a way to collapse the competing needs of the environment, community, shareholder, labor, management, because there's really no strong line between them. This is who we are as a company, this is where we want to go. It's important to us to make a profit, to have a good product, and then to use that profit for our own betterment. And it goes back to how I originally defined this as voluntary, commonality of purpose, intentional betterment. New Belgium does it. They're not, of course, the only employee-owned model in the US, but they're probably one of the most successful and in the public eye right now. There's a number of startup organizations in New York City. It was just just came out in the New York Times a week or so ago. Si se puede, Yes We Can, and another one, a home health care association in the Bronx, where the members train additional members rather than asking them to go take training courses from another private company to become home health care associates, and they work together in that respect. There's another one out west you may not have heard of called Winco. Winco is the company that Walmart is scared to death of. It's a contraction of the words winning company. It's a big box store. It's 100% employee owned. It's the same model as New Belgium on a massive scale. They're opening stores almost every single month out west. And their employees are compensated more highly than Walmart, and they all have health insurance, and their prices are lower. Keep your eye on Winco. Because it's not going to shareholders. It's,
And the bigger shareholders are the Walmarts.
Yeah.
So, that was Model 1. Model 2. This is one that has not taken off that much in the United States, but it's really big in Europe. And I kind of like this because this model of profit sharing accomplishes what we want to accomplish in terms of raising wages without the coercive force of government. And that's, there's something in that I really like. ESOP. 1950s in Europe, there were a lot of ESOPs, okay? They were more common in the US. There were a minority of companies in Europe where it existed, labor was usually paid in stock as a percentage of the profits the company earned, but they weren't growing. They weren't becoming more popular. There were no tax incentives to the company to do this, and there was stagnant growth. Then, 1990s, France decides to say, we're going a whole new way with this. And what's really nice about the French model is that whether the government has been conservative and de Gaullist or socialist, the governments have been completely supportive of this model. What this model does is the government offers tax reductions to companies on a ratio basis, as long as they give a cash-based profit sharing to all employees. Everyone, except the ones at the top. You can't give several $1,000,000 to your CEO and say, well, it's our profit sharing for the year. No, it has to be the same amount to all employees, starting with the person who is the part-time door greeter who's making the equivalent of minimum wage. Today, France is of all the nations in Europe, France is the leader in this approach. 35% of companies with 10 or more employees are doing this. 64% of companies with 50 to 99 employees are doing this. 82% of companies with 200 or more employees are doing this. In essence, the way it works is, for every $1 million you give to labor as profit sharing, we'll give you a $1.15 million tax deduction. In other words, you pay less taxes, and it's an incentive to pay your employees because you actually make more profit by paying your employees more. So I decided to play with some numbers. An American application, Walmart. And the numbers, I'll be very honest, they're simplified, they're rounded, and they're very hard to get. All right. Walmart has about 1.4 million employees in the United States. And I try to limit this to the US figures because obviously wage figures and things like that around the world where Walmart is going to skew some of these answers. They pay $45 billion in wages to those American employees, which averages all employees $32,000 a person. Now we know, obviously a lot of people working at Walmart are not making $32,000, but that's the average. So for every executive you have making 60 or 70, that's bringing the average up. That comes out to a $15.45 average per person, the entire slew of employees. Last year, 2013, they paid $7 billion in taxes. And one could make the argument, and I'm not going to go into that here because we just don't have the time, that they should be paying a lot more than that. But that's what they actually did pay, so let's deal with the actual numbers. And they paid $13 billion in dividends to shareholders, to mutual funds, to those people who expect to get money out of Walmart from Walmart's operations. So what I did was I applied the French rule of thumb. What if the federal government allowed a $1.15 tax break per $1 for every profit sharing? That side is what I just showed you, just so you have a comparison. This is how it would end up. Assuming wages remain at $45 billion, assuming the profit remains at $22 billion, we take $6 billion of the cash we've received and we distribute it to all the employees. Taxes then go down to zero. Now, you could argue, well, they shouldn't be paying zero taxes. Okay? And the French philosophy has been, if the company is compensating its employees the way it should be, then government will have less of a need to spend on social services that those employees need. That's the philosophy. Dividends would still be $13 billion, and when all was said and done, Walmart would have $1 billion more cash in the bank than before the approach. The average salary would go up to $36,000 or $17.52 an hour, which is an increase of $2.07 an hour. Now, you can begin to argue, the details. Well, $2 isn't enough. It should be $3 more an hour. It should be $4 more an hour. But it's a model to look at. It's something to consider as if tax codes were simplified and made more just, and companies were given this option, it means, A, the company that couldn't afford to do this wouldn't be forced to do this, as many very small businesses may not be able to in a poor economy. It also means that everybody shares in the profit sharing, not just those making absolute minimum wage, because we know the majority of the working poor actually make slightly above minimum wage. And this helps everybody. It begins to, once again, it begins to change the balance between who's more important here, shareholders or those involved directly in the company. It tips it a little further in the direction of labor. So that was another model, and this is a fun one. Third one, producer cooperatives. Let me say from the outset, I never use the word a cooperative in class if I can avoid it. Because we've taken the word cooperative as a verb, meaning, we get together and do things, and we've made it this noun, and it means almost anything anyone wants it to mean. And there are producer cooperatives, and there are consumer cooperatives, and there are employee cooperatives. So when people say, oh, a member of a co-op, or is that a co-op, it's kind of loosey-goosey. So I want to look specifically at a producer co-op here. And Ocean Spray Cranberry, and you must know these guys, is probably the best example of one that you'd be familiar with. Agricultural goods compete in perfect competition. That's a phrase that economists use, and what that means is the lowest price on the market is the price that prevails. World commodity markets ensure that the lowest world price becomes the price that all producers must meet. And here's why. If you're Kellogg's and you've got to buy 1 million bushels of corn to make your Kellogg's cornflakes, I can tell you that Kellogg's does not care whether that corn comes from Michigan, Iowa, Illinois, or Kansas. Or China. They do not care whether it's Silver Queen number 6 or Yellow Hybrid number 25. What they care about is this. If I'm Kellogg's and I'm driving along a series of farms, and this is a simplified example, and you're selling at $1 a bushel, and you're selling at $1 a bushel, and you're selling $1 a bushel, and you're selling at 99 9/10 cents per bushel, guess whose corn I'm buying? And if you want to sell your corn, it's all or nothing. You're going to go down to 99.9 cents. That is why family farms, it's one of the reasons family farms have struggled so much. It's the low price that controls, because you've got enormous purchasers of agricultural goods. One of the reasons that fair trade in the coffee business has become so important recently is because coffee prices in Central America collapsed over the last decade or two. And one of the reasons for that is because Vietnam discovered that they can produce coffee and get coffee beans to the Western Hemisphere more cheaply than those in Latin America can. And once Vietnam recovered from the war and built this industry up and got their coffee beans shipped around the world, Maxwell House and Folgers did exactly the same thing that I just did with Kellogg's. Who's got the cheapest beans? That's what we're paying. Central America, you want to sell your beans? That's the price. Take it or leave it.
How is it if the whole market can't be satisfied at that lowest price?
What generally happens is everyone is in competition with everyone else, so they give in to the lowest price and sell it to, with the corn, it literally gets sold to the grain silos in Chicago. And then Kellogg's goes to the grain silo and just picks up billions of bushels of corn.
But it seems if somebody can't meet that,
Then you go out of business.
but the market, Kellogg's bought their stuff cheap, but somebody else wants to buy some too. And the cheap stuff is gone.
And the problem has been in the agricultural industry, and I'm actually going to get to this in the very next slide, is that you've got thousands of producers and very few people at the next level up who do the buying. General Mills, think of corn. General Mills, Kellogg's. Name me another big buyer of corn. You know, Mazola, I don't even know who owns them. You end up with 5 or 6 buyers and thousands of sellers. And it's very easy for 5 or 6 buyers to say, well, the world market right now this is it. And if we don't get the corn we want, well, it just means there's a shortage of corn and we'll raise prices while farmers aren't selling anything. This is a problem across the board in agricultural goods. Because most farmers don't sell to the next step up in the United States. They sell to grain silos. They sell to those who amass all this stuff. Because when you eat your cornflakes, you don't know, oh, this is Joe's farm, and this is Sally's farm, and this is from Illinois. You don't know, and generally you don't care. It's just like a monopoly is the only producer of a good and can therefore, there's an upward pressure on the price the consumer pays. A monopsony, which is the word we use, when you have just one or a few buyers of the good are able to depress the price.
Could you say, what is commodity market?
Commodity markets are where agricultural goods are amassed and bought and sold. A commodity, by an economist's definition, may not be what it is in the vernacular, okay? I've heard people call things like washing machines commodities. They're not. A commodity is generally a natural resource that there's no distinguishing feature from it when it first hits the market. So, for instance, ExxonMobil does not care whether their crude oil comes from Venezuela or Mexico or Norway. Crude oil is crude oil is crude oil. And when you hear the news say oil hits $70 a barrel today, what they're saying is that's the price of oil on the world market. If you want to sell crude oil, that's the price you're selling it at. Because you're probably not even selling it directly to the person who wants it. You're selling it via commodity brokers on the floor of the commodity exchanges in New York City or Chicago who are selling it to bidders.
Well, I've heard that's true for coffee that is traded on the markets. Is that true of other?
Coffee, wheat, oats, coffee, any natural product, coffee, wheat, oat, corn, pork bellies, orange juice, soy, and also what we call extractives, oil, gas, gold, silver, platinum, that kind of thing. So, the USA had 6.8 million farms in 1935. We now have 2 million, less than a third of what we used to have. Average family farm income is lower today than it was in 1995. 20 years later, the family farm is bringing in less. So, how do you combat these forces? And this was my getting to play with PowerPoint. Get all these little small family farms. You're all farmers. And you got one big, large corporate processor. You got Kellogg's who says, I need 3 million barrels this month, or bushels. You're all in competition with each other. And if they say, hey, we're going to pay you $1 a bushel, take it or leave it, most of you are going to say, okay, we'll take $1 a bushel. Because the one person who stands out and says, no, I want $1.01, is going to be standing out in the field with their corn. The producer cooperative, the Ocean Spray, says, let's get all of us together at the bottom level and speak with one voice. It's really not all that different from labor speaking with one voice in a labor union in order to have equal negotiating power with management. Here, we're saying all of you small producers get together and speak with one voice, so that when Kellogg says, well, we're only going to pay $1, and you say, well, we need $1.02 to survive, or you're getting nothing, now we have a place that, okay, we're equals here. We can discuss this a little better. 1930 Ocean Spray started with 3 growers who got together and said, instead of competing against each other, instead of a race to the bottom, to use a phrase that's been used recently, let's do it together. By this year, there are 700 growers with 2,000 employees. The members of the cooperative, all the small farmers, make the decisions for Ocean Spray. You may think of Ocean Spray as this, oh, that's a corporation. It's a producer cooperative. The owners, most of whom now live in Wisconsin as opposed to Massachusetts where it started, the owners vote in their own board of directors to launch the marketing campaign and to initiate contacts with processors who want to buy cranberries to make them into some other cranberry product or something like that. The average wage for farmers, for people standing in the bog, for those 2 guys you saw in the picture that I showed, is $18.50 an hour. The typical farm wage in America for non-cooperative farms is $10.80 an hour. It's almost double. And if you go to the store and you look at the price of cranberry juice, Ocean Spray, and you compare it to apple juice, you're going to notice, well, it's much more expensive. Why is this? Well, one of the reasons it is because the producer is getting the price they need because they're not in competition with each other. Whereas the American farm we've lost 1.2 million acres in the last decade, and the number of farmers has decreased. That's the number of acres in cranberry production since 1968. It's a different story. I can tell you that this is 20,000 acres in production. That's where it starts. And it goes up to 40,000. So it's double. Now we're going to do a producer co-op on steroids. This is a producer cooperative with vertical integration. And next to New Belgium, this is also one of my favorite success stories. And this is Juan Valdez. You've probably all heard of Juan Valdez. Okay? What you may not have known is that this is also a producer cooperative that decided not just to go this way and gather in all the producers, but to go that way as well and reach you as a consumer. Before Juan Valdez came into being, you started with thousands of growers in Colombia, in competition with each other, paying to have their beans transported to various wholesalers who would give them the lowest price they possibly could, who would then sell it to processors, who would sell it to more wholesale merchants, who would sell it to supermarkets and cafes, who would sell it to customers. You know, that's the standard model going up the supply chain. And just to put some numbers here, U.S. customer pays between $2 and $3 a cup for coffee at a Starbucks. Growers receive 1.5 cents a cup because the profit is being taken in all these steps along the way, and these guys are taking the lowest price they possibly can for their beans in order to sell their beans. They got together. They got together and said, we shouldn't be in competition with each other, and we should find a way to transport our own stuff. And why are we dealing with these wholesalers who are trying to give us the lowest possible price? Because we don't know how to get our beans out of Colombia. We're farmers. We don't have access to capital, to banks, to ways to get this stuff shipped to the United States or to Europe or to Chile or to Brazil. We need to do this all ourselves. So Juan Valdez brought together as many growers in Colombia as they could. And they decided not only will we not be in competition with each other, we will speak with one voice, we will together form a marketing and organizational company called Procafecol, which means Promote Coffee Colombia, Procafecol. And that group that we elect and we own We'll take care of the transportation. We'll figure out what processor to use. Get this stuff into the United States, and you know what? We might as well sell the coffee ourselves. You now have 566,000 growers in Colombia, 95% of whom are small farmers. Their farms are less than 5 hectares, which is 12 acres. Small farmers who now collectively own 175 Juan Valdez cafes in 6 countries, including airports in Miami and New York, including about 20 in New York City alone. There's been a number of news articles, they actually are positioned to be Starbucks' #1 competitor at this point. The world price is 1.5 cents per cup. The best premium fair trade price, and you've heard a lot of companies say we're fair trade, and there's nothing wrong with supporting fair trade coffee, for sure, is 3 cents a cup, which is double. Juan Valdez growers are now making 5 cents a cup, which is even more than that, because they own the whole, start to finish process. The company they created, Procafecol, makes a profit itself. That's the one place where a profit is made beyond the growers. But because the growers own it, just like New Belgium, every year, including this past year, $13 million from that company goes to health, education, and welfare programs among the growers. The profit is poured back into the community. That includes roads, water, electricity, housing, and schools. The highest literacy rates in Colombia are among the coffee-growing farmers, small farmers, and usually in an unindustrialized or a lowly industrialized country, your agricultural communities have the lowest literacy rates. In Colombia, it is the exact opposite. The highest ones are found among farmers. All growers have accident insurance, which happens when you're in an agricultural occupation, and pensions. Growing practices must be in accord with the Rainforest Alliance. So they're also environmentally sound growing practices, simply to be part of this entire this cooperative. So this is a cooperative where we got together at the ground level and decided we're not selling beyond, we're going to be the direct to the customer. You've just eliminated a whole bunch of places, of points, where there could be conflict between groups who have different needs. Okay, 5. Firm I'm personally familiar with. Squeaky Wheel Media is not a company that is organized differently structurally as much as it's organized differently philosophically. Squeaky Wheel Media is an advertising firm in New York City. They were voted by Advertising Age, which is the industry standard for the advertising industry, as having the best agency culture in the industry. 20 of their employees are showed there. They actually have 22 now, plus Kuka, the cockatiel. Now, when you go to Squeaky Wheel, and I've been there, and I bring the business club students to Squeaky Wheel every year, they occupy the top level loft of an old industrial building. And when you walk into the advertising offices, I don't know what you might expect from an ad agency. It's one enormous open loft room. The two owners, Anthony Del Monte and Milet Lopez, who I'm going to introduce you to in a second, the two owners have offices. They're completely glass. And they did that on purpose so that everyone working in this one big loft area would sense that we were all in this together. The decisions are made collectively. There are no shareholders to worry about because Anthony and Milet own the company. And labor is valued and participates in the decision making. And Kuka is there with them because they've got all these pipes and the cockatiel flies around free in the middle of the building. This company decided, if you're an ad agency, who is your community? If you're located in if you do social media marketing around the world, who is your community? If you're located in a building that's a warehouse where there are no residences, it's a 100% industrial warehouse neighborhood in Hell's Kitchen, who's your community? Well, Mylette Lopez, the other owner, is a breast cancer survivor. And she realized that when she first was discovered to have cancer, she had a million questions. And she didn't know who to talk to, and there were people who were sympathetic, but they hadn't gone through it, they hadn't shared the same emotions she had shared. And she had trouble finding people just to talk over her illness with. So Squeaky Wheel Media decided, let's take 3 of our employees, 3 of the 22, it was 20 at the time, and we will pay them to do nothing but launch a nonprofit for those struggling with cancer. Whether you be a survivor, a supporter, or a battler, and I think those are the 3 words they use. And so they launched this website, the I Had Cancer website. This is the opening page. There are blogs where people get out their anger and write about what they're dealing with. When you register, you decide if you want to post your picture, if you want to post your address, and then you put in, if you want, what type of cancer you are dealing with. And then you connect with other people around the world. I had the same thing. Doctor told me the same thing. I had the same treatment. This is what happened to me. This is what you would expect. This is how I felt. Oh my God, I felt the same way. I can't believe you felt that way. It is a social networking site like Facebook or any of those sites specifically for those who are dealing with this illness. It's free to register, and it's completely 100% supported by the company. And their approach is, this is what we can give back. We know marketing. We know social media. It's how we make our money. It's what we do for a living. So now let's give it back, because who's going to put a site like this together and without having ads, without having people register and pay money for it? Completely 100% free. So, those are my 5 models. My entire approach being, how do you break down the fact that you've got shareholders, community, labor, government, competitors, all looking at management saying, we want this, we want that. Well, I've got to give this to this one and this to this one. One of the best ways of doing that would be to collapse some of those categories and find a commonality and purpose. And I think all these examples show that it can be done. It doesn't have to be the same old model.